All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Dan Rodney, and welcome to Noble Desktop's Getting Started in Web Design. Tonight, we're going to be talking about getting you going with creating websites, and it's mostly going to be a demonstration of actually building a website, so you can actually see, practically speaking, what exactly goes into making a website and making it live. So by the end of this session, I'm going to have shown you how to build a website and post it live and start to finish the whole process, literally from the beginning. Before we do that, I want to cover just a few general concepts so that we have some terminology in mind and kind of understand the landscape of how a website gets built. These slides here, if you are watching the recording on YouTube, I will put this link into the video description. For those of you who are attending live, I'm going to paste that into the chat so you can bookmark that for later. These are some slides with some information that I'm going to be talking about. And there's also a link to download a PDF of the coding part that I'm going to be showing. So I'm going to be demonstrating how to code a little website, a simple 2-page website. But if you want to ever go and actually do this coding, this little project that I'm showing, these are step-by-step instructions following through, like it says, go to our website, put in this download code, download the files, so you have the files to go with, and you can go through and build this little website that I'm going to be showing tonight. It tells you how to go get a code editor and download it and start coding up a website. So these are basically kind of your notes taken for you as far as the coding part goes tonight. So if you want to practice actually coding a website, you can go through this exercise, which is a step-by-step exercise. That also gives you a taste of what it's like to go through our coding classes, because we write all of our own training material. So when you're going through our coding classes, you have step-by-step exercises that walk you through doing code, so that in case you forget how to do something, you can always go back over that exercise. So Noble Desktop's been around for over 30 years. I've been an instructor there for over 20 years, and we teach people design and code. That's what we do. And tonight we're going to be talking about how to get started in web design in particular. In this set of slides here, you can use the arrows or your arrow keys. If you're on a touch screen, you can also swipe as well. So for building websites, what do you need for a website? Well, you're going to need a design. You need a plan. So you need to know what it is that you want to build. And you're going to need some graphics. You're going to need some photos and logos and icons. So that's kind of the visual side of things, that you would need the plan of what you want to build. And in the process, you'll inevitably create some graphics. Also, you're going to need some code to actually make the website function, to make it an actual website. So those are at a high level what you need. As far as coding goes, let's say you're a designer and you're like, oh, I only want to design websites. I don't want to build websites. You can just do the design and leave it to somebody else to code. If you're a web designer versus a web developer, web developers are coders. Web designers, it could be that you just design, or you could design and code. It depends. So when it comes to web designers, I always have to clarify by asking them, do you just design, or do you design and do you code? That said, the best web designers that I know of are people that can code as well as design. It doesn't mean that they only code all day long, because then they'd be just a web developer, not a web designer. But knowing how to code is just kind of understanding how the web works, and you understand this medium in which you're working. And Fast Company, just so you can take somebody else's word for it, not just mine, they recommend learning to code. Learn to code even if you don't intend to code. Knowing how to code will make you a better designer and a stronger candidate. And this is what I've been saying for years. I just like to have another article that backs it up, that as a designer, understanding code makes you a better overall designer, because you understand how the web works, you understand how to talk to developers, and it just makes you a better overall designer. But tonight is going to be part design and a lot of building, because we want to actually show you how to make a website. So that's going to be most of the night tonight is making the actual website. But first, we'll talk about doing some graphics. So as far as the demonstration goes. So we'll get to the hands-on demonstration just a little bit. Just let me go through a couple little terms and things so that we know when we're building the site what what these terms are. So there's front end and there's back end. So when it comes to front end coding, which is typically what more web designers will know, front end coding is HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. The hypertext is we can click text and kind of jump from page to page, but the markup languages label or mark up content. So they're saying this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a link that goes to another page. You're labeling things. It's not full-on computer programming, high-level logic and algorithms. It's just labeling things. This is some text, this is an image. That's the type of coding that you're doing. CSS, or cascading style sheets, styles that content. So the HTML marks up your content and labels it, and then the CSS uses that markup to style it. So you can set things like font and color and size and position. Are things next to each other? Are they on top of each other? That sort of stuff. And then moving into a little bit of a higher level programming is JavaScript. And JavaScript is where we program in logic and interactivity and animation. That does kick up a notch in terms of complexity. There are more programming concepts involved with JavaScript, where HTML and CSS are really not programming languages. They're more just coding languages where you're getting kind of a more direct result. You type in this code, you get this result. JavaScript, there's higher level thinking involved in JavaScript. But these are the three primary front-end coding languages that you can use. The cool thing about learning HTML, CSS is they're not just for websites. They are used in emails, ebooks, and even some applications. So emails are written with HTML and CSS. Ebooks are basically a package of HTML and CSS put into a zip file called .epub instead of .zip. And now if you're building an app, most apps use native technologies like Swift on iOS, but you can build apps like web apps or potentially native apps using HTML, CSS, and typically a lot of JavaScript. But there are some frameworks that allow you to convert JavaScript into something native like React Native. So but they're definitely used for multiple things, which makes learning HTML and CSS very useful. You know, people doing email marketing, they can use HTML and CSS. People doing ebooks, people doing websites, just useful all around. And I think with HTML and CSS, if you want to learn it, I think you can. It does take effort. You know, there is a bit of a learning curve. There is things to study. It's not an intuitive thing. We don't intuit language. Like somebody doesn't wake up one day and say, I'm gonna talk Spanish today. I'll just figure it out. Like nobody has to teach me Spanish, but I'll just speak it. No, language is not intuitive, but it's learnable. Now, if you sucked at foreign languages like I did, don't be afraid. For some reason, I'm fine with computer languages, but I was not very good with foreign languages. I don't know why that is. But if you want to learn it, I think you can put your mind to it and you can learn it. And so it's not as difficult to do websites as it is higher level programmings like building mobile apps or desktop apps. This to me is the difference between coding and programming. Coding, like HTML and CSS, they're easier than higher level programming like JavaScript and Java and Swift and these higher level programming languages. When you're starting to code, especially if you've never coded before, there's going to be lots of little codes to type in. And tonight, there'll be a bunch of different codes. Don't worry about remembering every single one right away. It's going to take a little bit of time. Instead, focus on the main high-level concepts of how the code works, how the syntax works, how you write a tag, how you write an attribute. And once you know how tags are written, how attributes are written, you can always learn more tags or more attributes. Kind of like if you know how nouns and verbs and adjectives work, you can put sentences together, but somebody can teach you a new noun and you know how to use it. And so the exact memorization of all the different codes, that will come with practice. And trust me, I was where all of you are in the beginning stages. You know, I wasn't born knowing HTML and CSS. I learned it just like everybody does. If you're going to learn this stuff, it just takes time to absorb it. And there's some things that you don't remember because you rarely use them. And then there's other things that you will remember right off the top of your head because you're going to use it every day. So, you know, Some people memorize things faster than others. Some people take longer. That's okay. Just do your best. And the more you code, eventually at some point, this is just going to come off the top of your head. You'll be able to just say, oh, I'll just write this code because I've done it a million times before. I don't have to look it up. In the beginning, you'll have to look things up or reference things more often. So in terms of a simplified version of the technology stack here, right now you are actually looking at a browser. So you are looking at this browser, and this is what we call the front end of a website. It's what happens in a web browser, as opposed to the back end, which happens on a web server. A web server is a computer with specialized server software that holds your files and serves them up to you. It basically sends them to you. So there's this computer, which is the web server, and then there's you and the browsers in between. So the server sends files to the browser, and that's how you view them. So the front end is the easiest thing. HTML and CSS being it actually goes in kind of order of easy to hard. So HTML is the smallest language, the easiest language. Then CSS gets a little bit bigger. There's more stuff to do, some higher level concepts as well. And JavaScript is the most complex of all of these. But in general, the front end is easier than the back end. The back end uses some other coding languages like PHP and Ruby, as in Ruby on Rails. And JavaScript is also listed, and you might be confused why it's listed twice. That's because JavaScript got its start only working in a browser. But as more and more people learned JavaScript, they said, hey, I really want to use this on the back end to do things like I would with PHP, to interact with the database, to get data, to store it, and to get data permanently that's stored on the server. And they didn't want to have to learn another language like PHP. So eventually JavaScript was ported over to the server so we can write JavaScript there as well. It's kind of like if you know English, you want to keep speaking English. You don't want to have to learn another language. Well, once people knew JavaScript, they wanted to use it on both the front end and the back end. So eventually JavaScript was ported over to the back end as well. And then there's things like WordPress, which are built on PHP. So PHP is the language. WordPress is a content management system, or CMS for short, which uses PHP to operate on the server. And it allows you to have a blog and create pages. Technically speaking, you can do it without knowing code, but that's just as far as administrating the content. If you want to control the look and feel of the page, WordPress has themes. Themes are made with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and some PHP to make them work. So behind the scenes, WordPress is driven by code. So somebody has to know code to make WordPress work. Can a regular user create a WordPress site without knowing code? Yes, but there's going to be limitations as to what they can do. They're only going to be able to kind of control the content. They're not going to be able to just do any design or any change that they want, because at some point they're going to have to go into the code and edit the code. So tonight, we're just going to keep things simple. We're just going to worry about the front end and, in fact, just HTML and CSS. I'm not going to get into JavaScript because this is an introduction. I want to keep things simple and be able to build a little website tonight so you can see the process, because instead of me just talking about it, it's such a big difference between seeing it and just hearing about it. So I want you to actually see the process of building a website so you can see it from start to finish. Obviously, we'll be simplifying things and trying to keep it within a small time frame here, but you'll get the idea. Obviously, we can't teach everything you can do in web design in 2 hours. I wish we could, but it's a bit bigger than that. Actually, we're not going to be here quite for 2 hours either. So design and graphics. Before you get to the code, ultimately, we're going to have to get to the code, but let's back up a second. We need to design. We need to have a plan of what we're going to code. What's the website going to be? Well, how's it going to look? Are there going to be any photos or icons or logos in there? So we need something to create those graphics. Those are typically going to be either Adobe XD or Sketch. It used to be Photoshop, but most people are now moving away from Photoshop to newer design programs like Adobe XD and Sketch. Sketch is a Mac-only app. Adobe XD is Mac and PC. Sketch does have a free trial that you can try it out for 30 days. Adobe XD has a free starter edition where there's some limitations put on the software. If you don't want those limitations and you want to kind of unlock the full capabilities of the software, then you can pay for it. So they kind of have like a free way to try it out. There are other programs out there, like for example, Figma. There is quite a bit of talk about Figma, but I just don't see as many design studios actually using it. Most of the people that I see doing design are typically using either Adobe XD or Sketch. And if you already have the Adobe Creative Cloud, Adobe XD comes with that. Tonight, I'm going to be showing Adobe XD, but fundamentally, they work basically the same. Adobe XD is Adobe's version of Sketch for the most part. It's quite similar in conceptually how it works. Granted, there are differences between the programs and the capabilities, of course. But the main point of tonight is I want to show you the general ideas of these things. And whether you're using XD or Sketch, fundamentally, it's the same idea when you're using these programs. So I'll be showing Adobe XD tonight. So let me show you some basics here. I'm not going to go super in depth with these things, but just to kind of get you started with it. So I've got Adobe XD here. And let's say you're going to start out a new document. You can start out a new document, and let's say you're going to design a website. So I can choose a website. The default is 1920, which is the number of pixels you're designing on for the screen. And 1920 is an HD monitor. Not everybody has an HD monitor. There's a lot of people that have a smaller monitor. And so XD defaulting to a big 1920 pixels wide monitor is a bit big for my personal tastes. Most people don't have that. Some do, but most people don't. So I like designing for a smaller screen. Ultimately, we're going to need to make this a responsive website. A responsive website is one that adapts or responds to all different size screens. So even though I'm going to be choosing a specific size, I'm going to be designing in such a way that I know that it'll be flexible across different screen sizes. So I'm going to choose this 1366. And if you're not used to pixels and thinking about pixels, the way that I like to get people started with thinking about pixels is think in relationship to the entire screen. So let's say your entire screen that you're designing for is 1366 wide. Let's just round up to 1400 pixels. So they'll make the math a little bit easier. So 1400 pixels wide. If I say 1400 pixels, compared to the 1400 pixel screen, you're thinking the full screen. Now, if I say 14 pixels, that's only a tiny, compared to 1400, think in relationship to the entire screen. 14 pixels is really small compared to 1400. If I cut 1400 in half and I say 700 pixels, 700 pixels would be half the screen. If you cut that in half and do 350, 350 would be a quarter of the screen. So when I say 100 pixels, that's pretty small in the scheme of the entire web page. So start to think in relationship to the entire screen, and that will start to get you used to how big pixels are. Also, for example, if you're doing a mobile phone, and a mobile phone is, let's say, 350 pixels wide, the whole width of the entire mobile phone is only 350. So if I say 100 pixels compared to 350, that's about a third of the screen. 100 pixels is much bigger on a phone than it is on a desktop. So that's why thinking relationally compared to the screen will really help you out when you're first getting started with pixels. So you would want to design in here. You'd want to bring in photos, make text. So I'd use my type tool, add some text here. This is text. I can bring photos in. For example, I can draw a box on the page here and say, I want to put a photo there. I can go to my desktop and grab a file. So I've got my getting started in web design. I've got my website here. And so let's grab this image here and just drop it into that box. And XD makes it easy to crop that photo so we can kind of size it where I want. I can double click to go into that box and I can crop the photo and choose the part that I want. So you need to learn your design program and design how you want the website to be. The web page would probably need to be taller than this, so I can select this artboard that I'm designing on and pull it down. That little line indicates you'd have to scroll down to see that. So the idea would be that you would see the part that's above that, and anything below, you'd have to scroll down to see. So as you have additional content, you'll have to scroll down to see it, which is fine. So I'm not going to go into all the details of the design process, but you would need to learn some design app, whether it's Sketch, Adobe XD, or something like that. You would need to learn an app like that. Now, to save some time, I have already started a design, and I have that on my desktop here. I have my page design already done. So I'm going to open up that file. What we want to do here is look at this design. Okay, so here we've got a plan for, I want to have a logo up here. I want to have some text here for a navigation bar. I want to have a photo. I have some text. I've designed like a heading. I've got a main heading. I've got some subheadings here that talk about me in this case. So we're going to make a little web page here about me as a trainer. So this is the web page design that I want to create. And once you have that plan, you know, what the font is, what the color is, that sort of stuff, some of these things will need to be graphics. So for the things that need to be turned into graphics, I need to export those from my design app. For anything that's text, that I will be able to create through code. So I can turn that into live text in my web page. I can turn in the font and the color into code. So I only need to export photos and logos and icons and things from my design app. So as far as exporting those go, I can select this photo, for example, and the name of the layer over here in the layers panel. There's a layers panel over here that I can open and close. I can give it a name, and that's going to be the name of the file. So I'm going to do a file export selected. And I'll just put this on my desktop. And that is a photo. Photos are best optimized as a JPEG. So when you're doing a JPEG, you can choose your quality. And I'm not going to go into super in-depth things here, but let's just say we export at 60% quality. We don't need to go all the way up to 100%. That's going to be way too big of a file size. You need to be careful of going with too big of a file size because it will slow your web page down. You want it to look good, so you obviously don't want to go too low on the quality, but you want to have something that is going to download quickly, and the lower qualities are a smaller file size. So let's say I go with something like 60. If I export as design, that's only going to give me a low-res file. I could export as web, which would give me a low-res and a high-res file. Somebody's asking in the chat, why JPEG and not PNG? File size. So the PNGs are huge. They do not lose quality, yes, but they're huge. They're giant. So that's going to really slow down your web page. You want to export as a JPEG. JPEG is for the joint photographers group or something. It's designed for photos to be efficient with file size. If you go too low on your quality, it's going to look bad and you'll be able to see the compression. But if you go low enough that you haven't gone too low, it's still going to look fine. You won't see the JPEG compression. If you see the JPEG compression, you know you've gone too low on your quality. If you export this and you have a good looking image, then you know everything's fine. So you want to be careful about your file size. JPEGs are going to be much, much smaller when it comes to photos than a PNG file. And Google ranks websites on many factors, one of which is speed. So the slower loading your web page is, the worse you'll rank on Google. So switching to a PNG would make your file size massively bigger. And yeah, it's going to be perfect image quality, but you don't need perfection. You just need good enough. Nobody's going to see the JPEG compression if you choose the right quality. Only if you go too low would you see the JPEG compression. So I'm going to export this for web, which would give me a low res as well as a high res version of this. We always design at 1x, which is like a low res screen, but we can export a low res as well as a high res here. And we can export those and we get those images. When it comes to icons and logos, those things ideally should be vector graphics, not pixel-based graphics. We don't need to worry about things like resolution, for example. So I can export that selected thing. And if I didn't give it a good name, which I didn't ahead of time for the layer, I can rename it here. When it comes to naming things, we really should name things with no spaces. So spaces are not allowed in our file names. So on the web, we have to use either dash or an underscore. So I normally like to use dashes. Also, technically, you can use upper and lowercase letters in your file names, but it's much easier to use everything lowercase because when we go to link to this in the code, you have to link it with the proper case sensitivity. So if you don't match the case, it's possible that the link might not work. So everything's just easier if it's all lowercase. But technically, upper and lowercase works. It's just much easier if everything's lowercase. And I would just personally just call this logo just to be easier. With a vector graphic like this, we can save as SVG, scalable vector graphic. We don't need to worry about low res or high res or something like that. The defaults here are fine as far as presentation attributes, and I don't have any images, so this setting right here doesn't make any difference at all. Although I would optimize the file size. I just mentioned about file size and being careful about file size. If your files are too big, bigger than they need to be, that will hurt your ranking on Google. So trying to keep our file sizes small is important because we want our web page to load quickly. Users don't like waiting a long time for a web page to load. And graphics are generally one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing on your web page. Mainly pixel-based graphics. Vector-based graphics are not that big. So this will save some size, but not a ton. Your pixel-based graphics, like your JPEGs, those are generally the biggest ones. And so I'll save this one here. And now I've got my graphics. And I also, importantly, have my plan. So you plan out your design in your design app, you export your graphics, and then what you do is you say, well, now I need to build this. Kind of like an architect is going to draw up plans and they plan the building before they start to build it. We are doing that at this stage. We're using our design app like Adobe XD or Sketch to lay out the plan, figure out what we're going to do, create the graphics. And it's possible some graphics would be created in, let's say, Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop. If I was going to batch process like an image gallery or something, I would be using Photoshop to do that. Photoshop is good at cropping and color correcting images and resizing them to specific web sizes. So I'm still going to use Illustrator and Photoshop as for whatever they work well in. But Adobe XD and Sketch are nice for the overall page layout and kind of coming up with a plan of what I want to do. You can even do things like prototype if you're trying to show a client or let's say you're working with other designers and you want them to see what you're doing. You can prototype things up and like actually make kind of clickable things that you can click through from one page to another, show different types of user interactions. You can test it maybe on users to see if they understand your design and if the flows are good before you start to code it. So you want to put effort into planning before you code, because code is required to make the website work. But these design apps are much easier to, if I just want to move something around and rearrange things, design apps are easy to do that. It's not going to be that easy to do that in code. So you want to spend your time quickly innovating, quickly designing in your design app, and then we go to the coding stage. So going back to the coding, let's talk about that. Let me go back to my presentation here and go back to my presentation here. So for the coding side of things, you do need a code editor. A code editor is like a glorified, specialized text editor. So you don't want to use something like Microsoft Word or something because they don't understand code. They're not going to help you. You could use something like Visual Studio Code, which is free, or Sublime Text, which is paid. Both of them are good. I like things about both of them. Visual Studio Code is free, so I'm going to show you Visual Studio Code tonight. But I'm not really showing you an app in this case. Like, I'm not really going to focus on the features of the app. I'm just going to be coding in one of these. So the codes that I would type in are going to be exactly the same no matter what code editor you use. So I'm going to focus on what we're typing in because apps come and go over the years, and I don't want to teach you just an app. The app is not producing our code for us. We have to know the code, and it might help you to write certain things, but it's not the app that's doing the work for us. It's us writing. Kind of like Microsoft Word doesn't write your story for you. It's just a place you write it. Same thing about code editors. So these are links if you want to go get the code editor. You can go over there and download it. And I want to show you now how to do some coding. So think of, we've got the vision, right? So this is what I want to produce. And I want to bring in my logo. my navigation, my photo, and all this text. So how do I code up a page that looks like this? I need to bring these various different things into code. So I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. And in here, it's already in a new document. It's basically like saying new file. So, but I'm already in there. And so we can either select a language or we could just save the file to save as an HTML document, because code editors can write lots of different languages. So we don't have to select the language. All we have to do is save it. So I'm going to go to my desktop with this file. I'm going to save this to my desktop. When you're saving an HTML file, they're going to end in .html. And essentially HTML files, let me call this, let me just call it the contact page. So let's say we're doing the contact page. Essentially, they're like plain text files. In fact, if you think about .txt plain text files, that's exactly what HTML files are, except they just have a different file extension. So any editor that can open up a plain text file can open up HTML files. Now, as far as naming your pages, you can name pages whatever you want. So let's say you're going to have like a services page. You could say my services, but keep in mind that you're not allowed to use spaces in your file names. You can use a dash or an underscore. Most people like dashes because they don't require holding shift, which adds just an extra key to it. So most people like dashes. So no spaces. Technically, you can use upper and lowercase, but again, there's case sensitivity. So if we were going to link to this page, we need to link to it with the same upper and lowercase letters. So it's just easier if you keep everything lowercase when it comes to your file names, because then you don't have to worry about, did I get my case right? If everything's always lowercase, then that's just one less thing to worry about. You can use basically any name you want, except for your homepage. Your homepage has a special reserved name. It's called index.html. Because out of all the pages in a website, when somebody goes to your .com name, how is the website supposed to know which is your homepage? It's a specially named file called index.html. From there, you can link to any other page that you want, but that first file needs to be called index.html. And if you think about it, in a book, the index is kind of how you find things in the book. Well, a homepage is kind of how you find things in a website. It's where you go, click a link to go to another part. That's your homepage. So that would be the first page. Then within there, there's going to be some standard tags that you're going to want to type in. And these are in the presentation, by the way. If I go back to the presentation and go to the next screen, I've got all these standard codes here. But before I'm not going to just copy and paste these in here right now. I want to go through and explain them. But just so you know, they're here for reference. Okay, it's just so you don't have to be writing them down off the top of your head here. So we have these tags in HTML. Tags are in these less than, greater than brackets. Tags are describing something. So they say, okay, we're going to write an HTML page. So this is a tag. Now, normally tags have a start and an end. So they say start here and end over here. So if I copy and paste that down below here, and I say I want to end the HTML. So I want to start it and I want to end it. The slash is the end of something. So that says that this is the start and this is the end. So basically your start and your end tags are the same except for that slash. Everything inside of this tag is now marked up or described as HTML. So in these tags, we're going to put everything that is HTML. HTML pages have two main sections, kind of like a person. They have a head and a body. Which do you think goes on top? If you look at a person, you got a clue. The head goes on top, the body goes underneath. So while I type, you notice there are code hints. For right now, I'm going to ignore these code hints because I want to focus you on what I'm typing, not what the code editor is doing. Now notice when I type that in, see how it completed the head for me? So some code editors are really anxious to try to help you out. And they say, well, you started the head, so I know you want to end it. And so they automatically create that ending tag for you. Just like if I create the body tag, for example, when I end that, Visual Studio Code automatically ends the body tag. Some editors do this, some do not. Some you can choose how you want it to work by editing your preferences. But we have a head and we have a body. And generally, you're going to open those up by hitting return and typing in some content into there. The body is the bulk of the web page. That's where you're going to put your content. This is a web page. No lie, I just made a web page. It's not got everything that I want to have in it, but I did just make a web page. So I'm going to save that file, and I want to go open that up in a browser. So I'm going to go to, let's say, Google Chrome. Google Chrome is a web browser. It's not the internet. The internet is a bunch of computers connected to each other. And through the internet, we transfer files so that we can preview them on a web browser. Files live on a server, which is a computer somewhere, and those files need to go over the internet to get to us so that we can view them. So I'm going to open up a new tab here. In this new tab, I can open up this file from my computer. So on my desktop here, I've got index.html. I want to open it up in my browser. I could do that by dragging and dropping into the browser. It's like opening a file in Microsoft Word or in Photoshop or InDesign or whatever app, in Adobe XD. You can open files from your computer in a web browser. It doesn't have the normal http something.com address because that's on the internet somewhere. It has a file path which is local on your computer. Notice what you see. More importantly, notice what you don't see. So you don't see the codes because you don't want to see the result of the code, right? Developers, they want to write code so that they can control how things work. But users just want to see the result of it. So they hide all the codes. The codes are executed by the browser, and you see the result of that code. And you can do this with any browser, whether it's Chrome or Firefox or Safari. You can drag and drop your file into that browser. Now what I can do is I can set this to the side, and I can pull this over here. And while I work, I can see that update over there. This is a web page, and let's say I want to add a title to the page. You might be thinking, what do you do in the head section of the page? So notice here up at the top of the page, it says the file name. Nobody really wants to see the file name there. And if you bookmark the web page, if I click bookmark, it's going to bookmark the file name. Nobody wants to see that. We should have a better title for this page. So this is one of the few things that goes on in the head that you can see. Most things in the head are done invisibly. It's like the brain of the web page. I don't see what goes on in your head. I might wish I could, but normally I can't. So most of the things in the head you don't see the result of. It affects the page, but it doesn't actually show up visibly in the page. So we're going to put in a title tag. The title is kind of like the title for the entire page. This is the title. And I'm going to save that. And whenever you save, you have to come back to the browser and hit the reload browser button. So reload the page, and then it says this is the title. Not only do you see it up there, but when you bookmark it, now you're going to bookmark the title. But the most important thing, to be honest, of the title is for Google, for search engines. So let me go to danrodney.com. So this is my personal website. On here, I have a page of Mac tips and tricks, Mac keyboard shortcuts. The title for this is Mac Keyboard Shortcuts, the Ultimate Guide. Okay, so that's the title in my page. Let's say you go onto Google and you look up Mac keyboard shortcuts. And here we have, there we go. Notice what it says. That's the title of my webpage. It's possible that Google could decide to show something else there, but in almost every situation, they're going to show the title of your webpage. So you want to choose a good title that describes what the page is about in words that somebody coming to Google would want to see. So, for example, my name is the least important thing. So I'm not going to start with Dan Rodney because people are not searching for Dan Rodney. They're searching for Mac keyboard shortcuts. That's the first thing that I'm going to show, right? So it's still nice to show what the site is. So I can see, oh, that's Computer World, that's Digital Trends. Just so as I'm going through, I can remember which ones I've been to. But the most important thing is what that page is about. So every page is going to have its own title that describes what that page is about. Now, even though it has a title, when you're actually on the page, people don't look up in the tab bar to see what the page is about. They want to see text on the page. So for example, even though that page has a title, on the page itself, it says Mac keyboard shortcuts. So people look at that. So within the page, you will also want to have kind of a visual title that people see. And these are called headings. So we have different levels of headings. But I want to actually get my real web page content into here before I develop this too much. So let me actually work with the real content that I'm going to have. So let me close that up. And in the provided class files that you can download, so at the beginning of the presentation, there's a link to download the PDF exercise. In there, there's information for downloading the class files. And there's two folders in here, the finished version and the starter version. So in here, I've got my website. And let's take a look at this. This is how you would set up a website. You'd have a folder somewhere on your computer. You'd put your images. Remember how I exported my images. You'd put your images into an images folder. And so I have my home JPEG that I've exported. I also have a contact JPEG as well, so that I can have a second page with a different photo. And then I also have my logo as well. So this is my logo. On the Mac, when you hit the spacebar to preview, Apple does a weird job of putting all this extra white space, and it's white instead of transparent. That's just Apple doing a weird job of previewing. This is a transparent SVG, so there's no background to it, and it does not have all this extra space. That's just Apple doing a weird job of previewing. But I've got my logo, I've got my two photos, so I've got those in my website, named appropriately, lowercase file names, no spaces in their names. And then I've got an index.html. And within the index.html, I've just got the text kind of copied and pasted. So I want to open up this folder, actually. So one of the things you can do in your code editor is you can open up folders. So I can say File Open, and I can go to my desktop here and go and I can choose that folder, open it up. And it opens up this, so I can take a look at images if I want to see those images. And I can select my file over here, and there we've got this. And in here, all I did is I just copied and pasted all the stuff from Adobe XD, just to save some time here. So I'm going to close up the little folder button here. So this little button opens and closes that folder view. So I can close that for the moment so we get more screen space here. So this is all the text just copied and pasted from Adobe XD, just to save time from copying and pasting. This is the content of the page. So thinking of the bigger picture of we've got an HTML document. The HTML wraps around everything on the page. So it has to start there and it has to end at the end. Then we break it down into the two parts. We have the head, and let me hit return here to accept that. There we go. So we got the head, and then below that we got the body, right? So we got the body. But the body is going to wrap around all of the content. So you're going to basically put all of your content, the stuff that people see, inside the body of the document. And in the head, you have that title that we talked about. So this would be about, in this case, it's a website about me as Dan Rodney, a trainer, a designer, and trainer. So Dan Rodney, instructor, designer, and developer. Kind of the three things that I do. All right, so that's what people would see in the tab up at the top. All right, and then we put all of our content down in the body. So notice this sense of wrapping. So you have some content and you wrap the start and the end around that thing. So here, the title, the head is wrapped around that thing. All the content, the body's wrapped around all of that. So there's this idea of nesting with HTML. Kind of like the Russian nested dolls where you have like a doll inside of a doll inside of a doll inside of a doll. That's the idea, is this content is wrapped by its tag. That is wrapped by its parent tag. So there's most of the time, there's a sense of wrapping. All right, so let me save that. And I'm going to go to put this into my browser. So I'm going to go to my desktop. And I'm going to drag and drop that index into here. So I'm going to drop it into my browser so that we can see it. And I bet you weren't thinking it was going to look like that, because over here, there are some returns. And it looks much nicer here than it does here. That's because hitting return in your code does not hit return in your browser. We need to give it commands. So, hi, I'm Dan Rodney. That is our heading. If we go back to our design in Adobe XD, we've got our main heading. We also have some subheadings here with the I'm a trainer and I'm also a web developer designer. So these are main headings and subheadings. We number those. We have heading 1 and then heading 2s. Heading 1 is the first level, most important heading. And then the heading 2s are subtopics within that main topic. So I'm going to code this as a heading 1. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to wrap my heading 1 around this. So you got to make sure that the end tag is at the end of that. So you're wrapping that around the heading. And I'm going to save that, come back and hit refresh. So there I've got my heading. Now for a subheading, that would be an H2. And you wrap your heading 2 around your subheading. It's a second level, so it's a topic within a topic. So notice it's smaller because it's a second level. It's not the main topic, that's the heading 1, it's the subtopic. If you would break that topic up into subtopics, those would be heading 3s. We have one other heading 2 down here, which is this one down here. So I'm going to wrap my heading 2 around that. Make sure that you put your end tag at the end. So you're wrapping your text in that tag. The tag starts before it and ends after, the ending being indicated by the slash. This is another subtopic. So let me save that file, come back and hit refresh. So these are both subtopics to this main topic. If it's about Dan Rodney, I'm a trainer, and I'm also a web developer. This would not be a heading 3 because I'm a trainer is not the topic under which this follows. This is its own independent topic of an equal importance to this. So that's why those are both subtopics to the main topic about, in this case, about me. Then we have paragraphs. So P is for paragraph. They try to be as much like plain English as possible. So P for paragraph, H for heading. So we wrap the paragraph around the paragraph tag around that paragraph. Start it before it, end it afterwards. Save that. And in this case, it actually doesn't make too much of a difference because it's just one paragraph. But when we have multiple other paragraphs, in this case, like let's say I put another paragraph tag here. If this were, let's say, multiple paragraphs in here, then I'd want to start my paragraph here. And this one I'd want to end up here. So like here. So this would be one paragraph, and this would be another paragraph if we're doing 2 paragraphs. Save that, come back, and hit refresh. So paragraphs are separated by a little bit of space there. In this case, I don't need 2 paragraphs. I just have 1 for each of those. So I don't need to end that paragraph here, and I don't need to start another one here. So I could just have 1 start of a paragraph here and 1 end right there. So I've got some headings and some paragraphs. All right. Now I need my images as well. So let me go grab my images. I need my image, and let's go back to the design. I need my image between the nav and the heading 1. So also I forgot to put a paragraph around the navigation. So P for paragraph, so that's like another paragraph of text up there. So we can have that. Also, if I want to, if I think it's nicer to kind of separate these onto different lines just to show that this works, hitting return in the code does not hit return in your browser. That's just formatting it to make it look nice. So see here, it does not go and hit return in all those little, every time I hit return there. It's just this is one paragraph, so it's all in one line. Okay, so let's go in and put the images in. I want to bring in the photo between those. So let's go between those right there. And I can insert an image. So when you're doing an image, the image tag does not have an ending tag. And the reason it doesn't and see, I can try, it's not going to let me end the image tag, is because there's nothing to put in here. When you have a tag, you're describing what's inside of it. If you have a start and an end, you're saying this is, in this case, this is a heading. This is a subheading. This is a title. But what would you put in here? That's not an image. That is a space, right? So you can't wrap an image tag around something. This is text. There's no image in here. I can say to insert an image, but I can't say this is an image. So we just have a start tag. There is no ending tag for an image tag. But we do have to specify what image we want. So this gets us into attributes. I can hit the space bar and type in an attribute. An attribute is it's like a preference or a setting that explains more about the tag. The image tag by itself just says to do an image. The source says, what image? Where is it? And whenever you have an attribute, you always have the tag to start, a space, the name of the attribute, and it equals some value in quotes. So what's the source file? Well, we need to tell it how to get from our current file into the images folder, and then to find the home.jpg. So in the same folder, we have the images folder. So I can say, go into the images folder, images /. / means to go into the folder. Then in there, we have a home.jpg, and I could choose that. That's the file name. So you have to tell it how to get from where you are to that other file. And so I can't just put the file name, for example, because it does not know that that's in the images folder, because it's looking in the same folder and it's looking around, because I'm in index.html. That's the file I'm in. If you just say home.jpg, you can try it. It's not going to work. If I come here and hit refresh, I'm going to get a missing icon there, missing image, because I didn't tell it how to get there. These are called relative paths. We need to say, relative to where I am, how do I get to there? Go into the images folder and then find the JPEG. So that will bring the file in just fine. Let's do it one more time for the logo. Up here, I want to have an image. And so I'm going to add another source attribute. And this is going to be the logo. So go into the images folder and then find the logo. So I will save that, hit refresh, and there's my logo. Now, what if someone is vision impaired or potentially blind and they cannot see, or they can't see very well, and they still want to know what these images are all about? Like, we can see that it says Dan Rodney, but what about if somebody is completely blind and they are having a screen reader read the web to them? We still need to make our content accessible to all, whether we can see or not. So for every image that you do, you should also have an alt attribute. Alt is alternate text. What would you want to hear if you could not see that image? In this case, it simply says Dan Rodney. So I would say the alt text is Dan Rodney. That's what I'd want to hear if I could not see that. In the case of the home image, some good alternate text for that would be laptop with notebook and camera next to it. So that describes what that photo is. Not netbook, notebook. Laptop with notebook and camera next to it. That describes that. So if I couldn't see it, I would still know what that photo is about. Notice that alt is another attribute of the image tag. So each tag has a specific set of attributes that you can do on that tag. So the image tag says, let's create an image, but we need to give it more information. What's the source? Where do I find the file? What's the alternate text? The order of attributes does not matter, but you do have to start with the tag itself first. And then whether it's alt or source in that order, it does not matter. They're just separated by a space, and you have the name of the attribute equals some value in quotes. But otherwise, the order of attributes does not matter as long as you separate them by a space and you put quotes on your values there. Any of those things can work. Okay. Now, there are a couple other attributes. Now that I've talked about attributes and tags, there's a couple other things that I want to put into my project. For example, this one right here, which I'm going to copy and paste just to make this go a little quicker. This thing starts before our HTML ever begins, and it says what kind of document it is. It says that it's a generic HTML file. It used to be that there didn't used to be any document type at all in the early days of the web. But then as different versions of HTML came out, HTML 1, 2, 3, 4, they eventually got up to HTML5, they'd have different document types. And it used to be with HTML4 that they were really long, and I would never remember it because they had like a URL in there. And it would tell the browser how to render the file. Because if any rules changed about how HTML and CSS was supposed to work, this document type needed to tell the browser how to render the page. Which version of HTML were we using? Well, starting with HTML5 and beyond, we're not numbering things anymore. We're now just calling it the HTML living standard. There's not going to be an HTML6 or 7. There's just the living, ever-breathing standard that just continues to develop and continues to get new features. So this is hopefully going to be our forever on document type, which just says, render this web page according to the very latest standards. The things that give us the most features, and as soon as some new features added to HTML, this web page will be able to take advantage of it. So at least that's the theory of this, is that it just says, render according to the latest standards. Not having it says, I'm a really old web page before those standards were implemented, and we don't want our browsers to render our page like that. So we always want to have that. It's just a single line, so it sets up how everything else is supposed to be rendered. And we won't really notice much of a difference here if I come back and hit reload, although there might be a little extra space added up here to the top. No, there wasn't actually in this case. Okay. We're not doing anything special in this case, so we didn't right now see things, but as we continue on and do things, eventually there would be things you'd see if you don't have that. So you always want to make sure you have that. And I'll close up these other files here. What else do we have here? There's two things that we want to have in here. I'm going to copy and paste those, again, just to save some time here. This meta tag, and there's a second meta tag. These meta tags do two important things. This one says to use a character set called Unicode. UTF-8 is for Unicode. Unicode means don't screw up special characters, like copyright symbols and trademark symbols and those sort of things. If you have any of those in your page, make sure that they display properly. So that makes sure our special characters display correctly. This one here, this makes sure that our web page will appear correctly on mobile devices. There's this thing called a viewport. And normally the viewport is like how a web page will be rendered and then scaled up or down to fit the device. So when early iPhones came out, for example, every web page was made for desktops and they had to scale it down to fit onto a phone. So initially the viewports would be desktop sized big viewports that they would assume, oh, your viewport is 980 pixels. I'm going to render you like a big desktop page and then scale you down. And then once web pages started optimizing, we wanted to say, no, I'm not a big 980 pixel desktop page that you should scale down. No, I actually want you to render me according to your device size. So we want each web page to say, well, the width of this is equal to whatever the device width is. So if I'm on a small mobile phone, the web page should render according to that phone. If I'm on a tablet, it should render according to that device. If I'm on a desktop, desktops actually don't use viewports, actually, but in theory, it would be whatever the desktop is. This viewport concept is only for things like mobile phones and tablets, which will scale your web page up or down to fit if you're like some old page designed before responsive sites were a thing. So this makes sure that your page will render according to a mobile phone size or a tablet phone size. You're still going to have to make sure your design is flexible to work with those sizes, but it's important to put this on here and to say to not scale it up or down at all. So it starts at a normal scale appropriate for that device size. So these just go in every page you do. And oh, I don't need that title there. That was an extra accidental copy and paste there. Okay. So we won't see anything different here on a desktop because that only affects mobile phones, but we would need that. So if you were to view this on a mobile phone, that is definitely important to have. Okay, so we've got the content, but it does not look nice. We want to make this look better. And so now we need to get into CSS, or cascading style sheets. This is where we can take the appearance that we've designed here and start to make this page look better. For example, the font that I'm using here is Arial for all of these things. And I've got a color here. If I click on the color, there's a color that's been chosen. So we need to start translating this appearance into cascading style sheets, or CSS. So let me go back to my code editor here. And you can make a shared CSS file that you share across multiple pages. To make this easier, just to keep things simple tonight, I'm going to put a style tag up here in the top of my page, just to keep things simple for tonight. The style tag is where I put CSS. CSS is going to style elements on the page. It's not going to create elements, it's styling them. So it's going to refer to all the things that I've already got on the page. So for example, P is for paragraph. I can put in P, which stands for the paragraph. That's going to style a paragraph. And then the curly braces are going to contain all the rules for how a paragraph looks. So how do I want a paragraph to look? Let's go back here. I'm going to select this paragraph text. So it's Arial, 15 pixels, and there's a gray color. I'm going to click on that color, and this is the code equivalent of that color. So I'm going to copy that code right there. I'm going to copy that. So Arial, 15, and that color. So let's go back here to my code editor. And I'm going to say that the font size is 15 pixels, and that the font family is Arial. And I actually like that they have this default kind of stack put in here, so I'm just going to choose that. What if they don't have Arial? If all I do is just do this, I wouldn't be specifying a fallback. You do need the font installed on the device for this to work. Now, everybody should have Arial. It's a very standard font, but what if they don't? By specifying a list, you're giving it a first choice, a second choice, and a third choice. If it's not Arial, it'll be Helvetica. If they don't have either of those, which everybody should have those, or at least one of those, but if they don't, then it would be some sort of sans serif typeface in general. The default serif typeface is Times Roman, so that's what the web page currently is. Now, you can specify custom fonts. We're not going to get into that tonight, but just know that you can do custom fonts. You can get things from either Adobe fonts or Google fonts. There's different places online where you can get custom ones. So you're not just stuck with these few that everybody has. In that case, you'll need to tell the web page to download the fonts behind the scenes, and then you could use those. But for right now, without getting too complex, we're just going to use standard fonts that everybody should already have on their computer. And then for the color, I'm going to paste in that color that I had copied earlier. And this is the code equivalent of that color. So I've got my font size, family, and color. Save that, come back, and hit refresh. And now my paragraphs have been styled. Now I do notice that there's actually the spacing between those lines is very tight, and I forgot to do the line height. So let's go back to Adobe XD. And right here, there's a line height here, which is 28 pixels. So in print design, that's called leading, but in web design, we call it line height. I know they call it line spacing, but it's in coding, it's called line height. So let's go back here and let's add the line height, which is 28 pixels there. And go back to my browser and hit refresh. There we go. Now we have some more space between those lines. And we'll just go through and we'll do a couple more rules here for the different types of things. So I'd make a rule for the heading 1. I'm putting this above just because conceptually, I think that a heading comes before a paragraph. But I could put the heading rule down below the paragraph. The order does not really matter in most situations. There are some cases where it does, but when you're styling different elements, the order does not matter. Just what makes it easier for you to find the code. Now let's go back to XD and select my heading 1. So that's 25 pixels. And I'm going to click on the color. So this has a different color here. I'm going to copy that color. So 25 pixels. So the font size is 25 pixels. The color is what I just copied. And also I could do the same font family there as well. Save that, come back, hit refresh. There we go. Now, notice that this is upper and lowercase, but in Adobe XD, this is all uppercase because I styled it as all uppercase. So how would I do that? Now, let's say, of course, I know what I can do to make this uppercase, but let's say you don't. You know it's CSS because it's styling. You're like, I want to style this. So let's say you go into Google and you're like, CSS, I want to make it all caps. I'm just going to click the first link. Let's see. Text transform, uppercase, lowercase, capitalize. Text transform uppercase sounds promising. Maybe capitalize. Well, let's read on here. So we can go through here. Capitalize transforms the first character. Oh no, not just the first one. So uppercase transforms all characters. Okay. So uppercase. That's what we definitely want. All right. I'm pretending as though I don't know these things here. So that my point in here is that if you know how to target an element, like let's style a heading 1, let's style a paragraph. And once you know that there's a property and a value, so look at the syntax of this. So properties are kind of like HTML attributes, kind of like we had a tag that had an attribute equals a value in quotes. With CSS rules, we have a set of rules, and we have the property name, and instead of an equals, we have a colon, and instead of putting quotes around it, we end with the semicolon. So the semicolon says this is the end of this property and value, so that we could put multiple ones on the same line if we wanted to. It's much easier to read when they're on separate lines. So, but all of them are property, colon, value, semicolon, every single time. So looking at this, property name, colon, value, semicolon. So knowing that I can copy and paste that in here, like so, it looks like everything else. I'm just adding another property now. I can save that, come back, hit refresh, and boom. Now it's all uppercase. So you want to learn the fundamental syntax of the way that we write things. And then you can always learn additional tags, additional attributes. And with CSS, you can learn additional properties and their values to see how those things work. For the heading 2, I'm going to copy and paste the whole rule here because basically it's going to be the same, except it's going to be the default color, which is black. And the size, let's check out what size I have in Adobe XD. This is 21, so slightly different size. So we'll do 21, and it's not uppercase. So just the same font and a different size here. And hit refresh. There we go. Okay. Now, let's say we now are thinking about the layout, because the text is all formatted, but notice how wide the text is. And notice how this is all like left aligned on the page. So I want to make it the width of the photo, and I want this all to be centered in the middle. So the space is equally put on the left and the right. This image right here is, let's see, I'm going to right click or control click on that image and open it up in a new tab. By opening it up in a new tab, I get to see how big this is. It's 720 pixels wide by 330. I care about the width. The width is what I'm most interested in here. It's 720 pixels. So for the width of this whole page, I basically want to make it 720 pixels here. So the whole page, basically the whole body, and oh, I somehow lost my body tag here. Let me put that back in. I think when I was demonstrating some of the things I shouldn't do with the code, like trying to end tags that I shouldn't end, Visual Studio Code started changing some other ones and trying to help me out in ways that I didn't want to be helped. Okay, so the body here. The body wraps all of the page here. So everything is sitting inside of that body. So what if I were to style that body? So let's say I go here to body and I put a width on that body, 720 pixels to be specific. And then I hit refresh. So now the content that's in the page cannot be bigger than 720 pixels. Cool. Also, if I don't want to repeat font family over and over and over again, you know what I can do? I can delete it from all these different places and say everything in the entire body gets the same font family. So everything in the body gets that. And that way I did not have to repeat myself 3 times. I could just have it once. Page is going to look the same, but I have less code. It's easier if I ever want to make a change in the future. And everything is still the same font, so that still works. So whenever you style a container, something that you put things into, those settings typically get inherited to the things that are inside and applied to those things that are inside. Now, the whole section here needs to be centered. And we also have another issue. The 720 pixels works, but what about on smaller screens? We have a problem because it's forcing me to scroll side to side. So that regular width is not going to work. I need what's called max width. Max width says the maximum you can be is 720, but you can be less. Width says you have to be exactly 720. You cannot be less or more. This is the maximum. You can't be bigger than 720. So here, it can't be bigger than 720, but watch the text as I resize this. It can be smaller. Now, the text does get smaller. That's good. Unfortunately, the image is not being scaled down automatically, and I want the image to be scaled down automatically. So I need to tell images in particular, scale down when they're inside of something. So I'm going to target all image tags. And what you're doing here is you're putting in the name of the tag, the body tag, the image tag, the heading 1 tag. There are other ways to target things, but for right now, to keep things simple, we're going to be targeting tags. So the image tag is what I'm targeting here. In fact, all image tags. So here I want to say that the maximum width is 100%. The biggest this can be is 100%, and it's 100% of its container, whatever it's sitting inside of. It means you can't be bigger than the container you're sitting inside. And so now let's hit refresh. And so now notice that photo scales down. Now, I think what some people are going to think of is they're going to think, well, why didn't you just do 100% width? Because you're saying you must be 100% of what you're in. And that means that logo has to be 100% width of the thing it's sitting inside of. So it scales up. I don't want that. I want to just say, be your normal size as long as you're smaller than the container. The biggest you can be is 100% of the container you're sitting inside. But you don't have to scale up. Okay, so now I'm close. I've got a flexible page. That's good. The only problem now is that I've got all the space to the right. This is what I call stuck to the left-itis. I don't want it to be stuck to the left. I want it to be centered. And what I think a lot of people would naturally guess to do is probably just center the text, which is not going to work. Let me show you. Let's say I say text align center. Now that says to text align center. So that means in the box, the text will be centered. Yeah, not the box. No, the text in the box. So that doesn't work, but I think a lot of people try that out. So that's not what we want. No, instead, what we want to do is we want to talk about the spacing. So this is space outside the container. There are 2 types of spacing in a web page: margin and padding. There's a question in the chat. When do you use curly braces versus the less than, greater than brackets? Good question. HTML uses the less than, greater than brackets. CSS uses the curly braces. And that's actually how it differentiates between your CSS and your HTML. And again, HTML is for creating and labeling your content, and the CSS is for styling that content. So CSS says how images and how headings look. It doesn't actually create them. In HTML, we have to create those things, and we use the less than, greater than. And then in CSS, we use the curly braces there. Yeah, so it's to differentiate the languages so that we don't get confused as to whether we're creating something or styling something. Yeah. And so you'll notice that within HTML, it's consistently always less than, greater than brackets versus the curly braces, which are always in CSS. Yep, that's a good question there. And you'll notice that in other languages like JavaScript, there'll be specific uses for when they use parentheses or curly braces or square brackets and those type of things. But yeah, HTML versus CSS. Okay, so we were talking about padding versus margin. So there's two types of spacing, padding and margin. Think about a box like the photo. So just visualize a box in your mind. Padding is space in the box. Margin is space outside the box. Just think of a literal box that you're going to ship out via like UPS or something. When you're going to put something in the box, you put the padding on the inside of the box. The delivery guy looks at you really strange if you put the bubble wrap, the padding on the outside of the box. He's like, why didn't you put it on the inside? So padding goes inside, margin is space outside. So I have set a size on this element, and there is space outside of that size. So that is margin space. So if I go to the body and I adjust the margin amount. So when I do margin, and let's say I zero it out. Now the things are touching the top and the left. There was a little bit of space there before. Now it goes this wide, and it's not removing that space because they're not changing the width of the window, right? They can't know how much space you're going to have left over there. So it's just adding as much as it needs over there. But let's say I did like 100 pixels here. So now there's 100 pixels above, to the left, to the right. So now when I do this, there's now 100 pixels all the way around. If my browser window's too big, there will be additional space out there. And the trick for me is I want to make the space to the left and the right equal. I just don't know how much space that's going to be because I can't know how big the browser window is going to be. So I want to set it simply to auto. Just automatically figure that out. And it will automatically balance the left and the right hand margins. So if there's no extra space, there won't be any margins. If there is, then it will automatically make them left and right the same. Now, I do like some extra space here on the smaller screens. So remember, we have the two types of spacing. Margin is space outside of the box, but padding is space inside the box. So when there is no space outside of the box, I still want some space inside the box. And the box here is the body. It's the thing that's wrapping the whole page. So I'm going to add some padding to this as well. I don't need a whole lot. Let's maybe try 15 pixels or so. Doesn't need to be a lot. And that just adds a little bit of space. Maybe I could use a little bit more. Let's go to 20 pixels. There we go. So now I have a little bit of space here when there is no additional margin. And then when there's extra margin, it will make sure that the left and the right is there and it's equal to each other. So I now have a nice, flexible, responsive page. It's only one page though. I do want to make a second page. And then I want to upload it and share it with the world. So let's make a second page. I'm going to do that by saving as. So I've already saved this page, and now I'm going to save as to make a copy. So I'll save as, and I'll call this contact because I'm going to make a contact page. I'm going to open up my little file explorer over here. So I'm going to open up my index and my contact. Both pages will be open. On the contact page, I'm going to change the title to say contact Dan Rodney. And on the page, I also don't need all of the, I don't need the whole second heading and paragraph, so I'll delete that. I will just have one main heading, just a heading 1, which will say contact Dan Rodney. That's what people will see on the page. And then the paragraph will say, please email me. I am lonely. I also don't want the contact.jpg. I don't want the home.jpg. I want the contact. I have a contact.jpg. So I'm going to change that to contact.jpg. And that is a photo of Dan teaching a seminar. All right, so now I need a way to get to this page, by the way. So how do I get there? From the index page, which is the home page, I want to be able to click the word contact to get there. So I'm going to wrap a link tag around this. A stands for anchor tag. It's a way to link from a page to another page. By itself, you would never use an A tag by itself. A stands for anchor. It's a metaphor they use, like if you think about a boat, you're anchored to the ocean floor, so you're kind of chaining yourself to the floor, you're kind of connecting to something. So it's how we anchor ourselves or link ourselves to another page. But you always will have an you'll have an href attribute. Href is for hypertext reference. So if you think about hypertext markup language, we're writing HTML, hypertext markup language. We're making a hypertext link. We're href, hypertext reference. What other page are we referencing? And we give it a relative path of where I am to find the other file. So I'm in index and contact is in the same folder. So all I have to do is just say the name contact.html because they're in the same folder. If it was in another folder, you'd have to put in whatever that folder is and a slash. And if there was another folder, there'd be another folder. How many ever folders deep you need to go to get there? But it's all in the same folder for this case. Okay. So now I have a way to get there. So I'm going to hit refresh. Now this looks like a link. I can click it and I come to this other page. There we go. Of course, I need a way to go back. So probably the logo should link back. So let me go back to the contact. And I'm going to wrap a link tag around the image. So anything can be put into a link. Images, text, whatever you want. But you will always have an href of what page you're referencing. I'm in contact.html, and I want them to go over to index.html to go back to the home page. Doing things like hitting tab here to indent. I normally like to indent things that are nested inside of something, just so I can see the start and the end, but it's not required. And if you want to put this all on one long line of code, that's fine if that's understandable. But sometimes when you have something inside of something, it's nicer to have your start and your end so that you can clearly see the beginning and end. If you tucked it in like something like this, it would be easier to miss your start and your end tags. HTML doesn't care. It's fine with that, but it makes it easier for us to code if things are on different lines to kind of see the structure of our page. So I'll save that, come back, hit refresh, and now I can click the oh, stupid. yeah. Thank you in the chat. You did the bottom photo. Yeah, got to do the right image. Got to do the right image. Thank you. Pay attention to which image you're doing. Here. Okay, so now it's up there around the logo. Yeah, hit refresh. There we go. Yeah, if I would have clicked that one, it would have gone. So make sure you get the correct photograph. There you go. Okay. All right. So I made a little website that only I can see. I can go back and forth. The website works, but none of you can see it because it's on my computer. So how do we get it to other people? And this will kind of complete the website. So you're going to need some hosting service. So let's say, there's a bunch of different hosts out there. I'm just going to use something like Bluehost, HostGator. HostGator. They have a little bit more direct pricing here just on their homepage. I'm not going to recommend one specific hosting, but just I want to give an example of a host. So there's Bluehost, HostGator, GoDaddy, Media Temple. There's a ton of different hosts that are out there. They have different pricing, different features, but let me just go over the main kind of concepts here. So let's say you look at hosting. The most affordable hosting is called shared hosting because you're sharing servers with other people. It's kind of like you live in an apartment building. Somebody owns the whole apartment building and you're just renting an apartment in that building. They own the whole server. You don't have to pay for the whole server. You're just paying for access to part of a server. Basically, everybody's kind of going together to pay for the server. If you have your own whole dedicated server, that's a whole lot more expensive because you got one whole computer dedicated just to your website. Most regular websites don't need a dedicated server just for themselves. They can share it with other people. So that's what shared hosting is all about. And let's say we look here, you can get one website or you can get as many websites as you want. Okay, that's kind of cool. So for a little bit more per month, if you're going to do multiple websites, you could go to something like an unlimited plan. So let's just take a look at that one. And just in case you want to do more than one website. So we'll click buy just to compare here. And now that introductory pricing, be careful of introductory pricing. Introductory pricing is meant to get you with a host and kind of keep you there. Now, as long as you're happy with the host, you would stay with them. But you might not, for example, want to lock in for a 3-year thing. When you're first getting started, you might want to just say, well, let me just try out a host for a year. But whenever they give you that introductory pricing, just keep in mind that that's only for the first year. Always read the fine print of what it renews at. So for example, they're like $5 a month, but when it renews, it's going to be $12 a month. So just always read that fine print. And almost all the major hosts gives you that introductory pricing. And just know that that's only for like a year or whatever it is. And then after that, it goes to the normal pricing. So always really care about that, because if one place gives you cheaper for the first year, but every year after that is more expensive, then it really wasn't a good deal to begin with. So look at the renewal price. So in this case, it's going to be $12 a month if you pay year by year. You know, you do get a discount if you go for paying 2 years at a time. You save $1 a month. But it's up to you if you're willing to commit to that. If you're not, go for something. But you know, $12 a month is what you're going to be paying. So it's not too expensive to get a web host. And in this case, this is for as many sites as you want. This is not just for one. If you want just one site, you can get it for a little bit cheaper. Also, something that comes into play with this is you will need a domain name. So you need to search for your domain name. That's your .com, .whatever. You know, you got .net, .host. There's a whole different, different types of things. Let's backtrack to this one. Notice they say you get a free domain name included. Now, the domain name, so there's two main parts to a website working. There's your hosting and your domain name. Your domain name is your .com name. Technically, these do not have to be the same companies hosting these two parts of the process, although when you're first getting started, it's easier if one company does both. But for example, if you've maybe purchased a domain name from GoDaddy and you want to use HostGator for the web hosting, you can point your GoDaddy domain name at HostGator's web hosting. So domain names are merely pointers. They're kind of like an internet address. They say, go over to that web host, and that's where everything lives. So the web host, that's your biggest cost. You're going to pay, let's say the $10 or $12 a month for your hosting. The domain name is anywhere from maybe $9 to $15 a year. So it's a much more affordable thing because the domain name is just a name that says, go over to that host. It's just a pointer. They're like, yeah, you go over there. The domain name itself doesn't really do that much work. It just points you to a server. They can be the same company that does both, but technically the domain name hosting and the web hosting can be separate. When they say free domain name, that's not free forever normally, because every year you have to renew your domain name, and generally domain names cost anywhere from $9 to $15 per year, not per month, but per year. So again, read the fine print. So in this case, they're saying, yeah, you get a free domain name for a year, but then after that, they're going to renew it $18 per year. So they charge a little bit more in this case. So they charge $18 per year. So that will be in addition to the web hosting, right? So, and I think that's the regular rate that they offer. So yeah, the first year they give it free again, because they're trying to make your first year cheap so that you get with them. And then after that, then you'll have to pay for your domain name. So that's going to be two charges, one yearly charge for the domain, and then the monthly charge for the hosting that you do. All right. So let's say you sign up with a plan such as HostGator or GoDaddy, whoever it is. You sign up for an account and you're going to get your domain name, you're going to get your hosting plan, and you're going to be able to sign in to your account, typically into what's called a control panel or cPanel. So with cPanel, that's short for control panel. That's where you get all the information about your website. That's where you can define your different websites. If you're paying for multiple plans, like unlimited websites, you could define new websites. If you're just getting one, it's where you can manage the one website that you get. In there, you want to look for FTP accounts or FTP info. FTP meaning File Transfer Protocol. Fancy words for copy files over the internet. You need to copy your files from your computer to their computer, because that's what a web server is. It's a folder sitting on a server waiting for your files to be put there. If you don't know where to find it, if you don't know how to get this information, you can contact your host. Some hosting plans offer phone support, so you can call them up. If they don't offer phone support, do their chat or their email. But when you're first getting started, you might want to make sure that your host does phone support, so you can always call them up if you have any questions and they can walk you through things. But you'll need to log into your account, and you need that FTP info. And there's three primary things that you're going to find in that FTP info. So your FTP info is going to be your username and the password, and then it's also going to be the address that you upload to. So that's going to be an FTP address. And the username and password might be the same on your account, or it might be different for the uploading stuff. So those three things: username, password, and address. If you don't know where to find them when you log into your account, contact your host and they should be able to help you find that information. This is how you're going to upload the files, or File Transfer Protocol, copy the files up to your web host. We have a website that we use, which is a fictional place called thejivefactory.com. So we pay for this domain name and we pay for hosting. And this is, we just use it for demonstration purposes. It's not a real place. Don't try to go there. And on there, I don't want to actually replace the full website. So I'm going to put a little folder in here called Rockstar. So I'm going to go to /Rockstar. Just pretend that this is like the full regular domain name and just ignore the Rockstar part. That's just so that we don't delete the live website. So this is just a placeholder page, and I want to replace this with the site that I just made. So I need to use an FTP program to go upload my files to my web hosts. So you need an app, something like CyberDuck. And if you Google CyberDuck, you get to cyberduck.io, cyberduck.io. Go to the download part. By the way, if you go to the regular homepage, there's probably, I have an ad blocker, so I don't see the ad up here, but there's a lot of times an ad up here that says download. Do not click it. You'll get something nasty. These are the actual download buttons over here, download. Okay, and actually sometimes they'll put up like a little dialogue that says, here's an ad, and then you have to click continue. So when you Google CyberDuck, the best way is just to click the download link there to go right to the download page, and make sure you get these. Don't click anything in an ad or anything, please. Google should never allow ads that say download, but they do. So just make sure you get the real downloaders and you'll be fine. If you download something from an ad, you're going to get some nasty software that you do not want. So it's not a problem with CyberDuck, it's Google allowing ads that they should never allow. So you download this little app, and I've already got it installed on my computer. So I'm just going to go ahead and launch CyberDuck here. There's other FTP apps, but I like CyberDuck because it's cute and it works well. I like its interface. So CyberDuck is how you open a connection to your web host. And you put in your server. In this case, it's normally ftp.yourwebsite.com in most cases. So we're thejivefactory.com, so it's ftp.thejivefactory.com. That's mostly what it's going to be. And then you'll have a username. So in our case, we are Rockstar. Rockstar at thejivefactory.com. And it remembers my password because I've done this before. But you put in your password there. So those three things: address, username, and password, which you get from your web host. And you click connect, and this goes into that folder on your web server. Ignore the CGI bin. We don't normally use that anymore. It's kind of old stuff, but we just leave it there and ignore it. But there is the index.html. That is exactly what you see here as a placeholder page. I want to replace that page with all the stuff that I did locally on my computer. So I keep CyberDuck over here. I go to my desktop, and I take all the files, the images, all the web pages, everything that I've done, and I drag it onto CyberDuck to upload. In this case, there already is an index.html, so it says, hey, do you want to overwrite this file? Like there's already that file there. Do you want to overwrite it? Yes, go ahead and continue. Just replace the one that's there. And once it's done uploading, there we go. They're now on the website, and I can go and hit refresh, and there is the website live for anybody to see. I can go between the pages, and it all works just like we would expect locally. So for anybody attending live, if you did actually want to go there and see it just to see that it works, you can go there. If you're watching the recording, it's probably not going to be up anymore. But yeah, it's a live website now. Now, keep in mind that you now have your local and remote. So the remote is the live web server, and you have your local file too. So you now have two versions of your site that you need to maintain. The idea of this is that you work locally on your computer, making sure that you like changes before you upload them. You do not work directly on your website, because if you ever mess something up, you'd mess it up live that everybody online can see. So let's say I want to update a page on my computer. These are my local files. So contact Dan Rodney. Please email me. I'll say, please send work. I had a baby. All right. So I make a change there. Does that update my website? No. That updates my local files. So when I look at my local file, the file path one here, if I hit refresh, yes, that one updates. The live server, that hasn't been updated because I haven't copied my local file up to my website yet. So after you make sure that you like it, you make sure it's good, then you just re-upload it. And you only have to upload the things that changed. So only contact changed, so I'll just re-upload contact. It'll say, hey, the file's already there. Do you want to overwrite it? Yes. Now, if I go to the live website and hit refresh, now that will be updated. Now, let's say you get invited to work on somebody else's website, and you're not going to have their files. They would have to give you their FTP info. So they give you the address, username, and password. When you log in, you see their files. You don't have them on your computer, so you want to download those to work. So let's pretend I'm doing that. Let's pretend I don't have my files here. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I call it client's website, whatever the client name is. And into there, I would drag in the files from their server, download it to my computer. And then once I have it, now I can open it up in my code editor. I can make changes, make sure I like those changes. And when I'm all done, I can re-upload them to the server. And I've just updated somebody's website. So there's just your local files and your remote files. You work locally, make sure the stuff is good. When you're done, you upload those through FTP to update the live website. That is the general practice, the general idea of how this works. So we have more web design classes, of course, if you want to continue this learning and you actually want to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you want to learn these more thoroughly. We have a set of different certificates that you can do, and you could do these live online, or you can do them in person in New York City. That's where we're located. If you're doing them live online, we do it through Zoom, just like this. We have workbooks, kind of like the exercise that you could download as part of this this free seminar here tonight. You get workbooks as part of the program. The front-end web development certificate, that concentrates just on coding. So if you look at the syllabus for that, we go through HTML and CSS in our first two web development classes, and then some advanced kind of page layout techniques. We go into JavaScript and some general kind of coding tips and tricks as part of the program, but it's focused just on code, no design as part of that, no graphics. If you're interested in the graphics, then check out something like web design. Web design is a little bit more fully kind of well-rounded. And so in that case, you not only learn the coding, but you can also learn either Sketch or Adobe XD. You can use either one. You can actually swap them out. They're the same length class, so you can take either Sketch or Adobe XD. but you learn all of the coding and the Sketch or Adobe XD, and also HTML email. So you learn how to create emails as well. So a couple choices there. Don't forget at the beginning of the slides here, if I go back to the very first slide, there's a button here to download the exercise PDF. And so if you want to go back and if you want to actually code up the little website that I coded up tonight, and you want to go through and you want to code some HTML and CSS, this is all the steps written down for you. There are the information for downloading the class files. It tells you to go onto our website, punch in this download code, you'll get the class files. It has the information for downloading Visual Studio Code, which is free. You can go through that and literally step by step, opening the files, typing in the codes, adding the stuff, previewing the files, all the stuff that you would want to do to code up the site. We don't go through the uploading part because we don't know if you have hosting or not in that case. So, Anita's asking, how do we get to the place to the, yes. So this is the URL here. So for those of you who are attending live, I'm going to paste this into the chat. So there's the address that you can go to. For those that are watching the recording, this will be in the video description down below on YouTube when you're watching this. So we have a question in the chat about full stack. So full stack versus front end. So the front end is what you see in the browser. So let me go back to this whole diagram here. So this is the full stack, front end and back end. And so we were just talking about front end stuff tonight. So if you do front end and you do back end, then that's what we call full stack. So for example, you could do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript just in the browser. That's typically what I do. So I'm a front end developer. But then if you learn JavaScript for back end with something like Node.js, and you could do both front end and back end, then you would be a full stack developer. Don't feel like everybody has to be a full stack developer. If you want to do front and back end, of course you can. It depends on what areas you like more. Like if you really love coding and you want to really get deep into coding, then you might be good as a full stack developer. You can learn everything, front and back end. If you more are a visual person, if you like doing more design and you like doing some code, but you like more focusing on the visual side of things, then front-end development is better because HTML and CSS is really how the page is laid out and how it looks. That is more visual in the way that it works. Back-end server stuff gets more into functionality and logic and how it works, which some people really love that side of things. So it just depends on what kind of areas you gravitate towards. No matter what, though, even a back-end developer needs to do at least some HTML. So everybody should start with HTML. How much CSS somebody needs to know depends on if you're laying out the aesthetics of the page. If you're styling the content, then you really need to know CSS well. If you're a back-end developer and you're mainly concentrating on back-end, then you might not need to write as much CSS. But everybody needs to write HTML to some extent. Here. So, but if you're not sure, I would just say get started doing some coding. Get started with the front end. It's the easiest. It's the core. Everything builds on HTML, so it's the first thing you want to learn anyway. Just see how you take to it. See how it goes, and then if you want to keep going and you want to keep getting more advanced, then you could end up doing some back-end stuff. If you realize you're like, hey, this is enough code, I'm good with this, I like staying more on the visual side of things, you could just end with the front end and you don't have to go to the back end if you don't want to. So I am going to answer some additional questions here for those that are attending live. For anybody watching the recording, I just want to say, I hope you got a lot out of this and that it was useful for you. And if you want to continue your learning, whether you do it in person, in New York City or live online, keep in mind that all of our classes are done live in Eastern time, New York City time. So, but you can tune in live. We do a screen share. You can watch the instructor coding, talking about the concepts, and then those exercises that we write, those are step-by-step exercises. You get a workbook in each of the classes that you go through. So it's a great way to learn how to code and how to create websites.